I grew up in the 70s and 80s when no one talked about being gay. So for a long time, I didn't know that I was. But I knew that I hated feeling the way I did. I hated feeling different, feeling on the outside. And no part of the world around me told me that it was okay to feel the way I did. Not knowing how a young man from a Welsh working class community, feeling the way I did, could lead a happy life. Things are very different now, but that was my story then. And this building, here in the Dylais Valley, in the community I now represent in our National Senedd, is where that story started to be rewritten for so many people. A story about two communities, the London lesbians and gays who came to support the striking miners of the Neath Dylais and Swansea valleys. That's why this place is so special. Different communities, a shared humanity, which sparked a change which means that today a young person growing up gay knows they belong. We're always searching for what we have in common, but the truth is we learn as much from our differences as from what we share. And every single one of us is different. Every one of us has their own story, has their own history. And as we tell those stories and those histories in LGBT History Month, they all play a part in modern Wales. What my story has taught me is that every kid, whatever their background, deserves the best start in life, and to be in an inclusive school which reflects the diversity of modern Wales, so that they don't feel on the outside like I did then. And I won't compromise on that because it's personal. That is what my story has taught me.
In August 2022, ITV broadcast a podcast from the Royal Welsh Show, where host Liam McConkey interviewed Jeremy Miles and Steffan Evans, a teacher and member of the Wales Federation of Young Farmers Clubs. Evans is a teacher at Ysgol Calon Cymru in Powys. He was asked about the influence of the Welsh Government's LGBTQ+ action plan on school life.
And I gather for you, Steffan, working as a teacher, what the LGBTQ+ action plan will do will have a massive influence on your day-to-day role, I imagine, in many ways. And it will allow you to kind of do those, pride events with much more backing, I imagine.
Yeah, I think the worry is, and I think you see this on the ground day to day, is the confidence of staff and individuals in those in the sector then. And I suppose you could see that filtering down, yes, it's great to have the action plan, but we are worried, and I would say, yes, I'm worried, and I can speak on behalf of my colleagues who are very supportive. There are none that won't support it, but you do have the, even the day-to-day running of a school, things like reports, writing reports on an individual. Now then, if we have somebody identify they, them, rewrite the reports. We have to rewrite how we give a reporting of their education. And I find myself having to write my own reports and then having to proofread and have a look and help other staff members, which is not necessarily my role in the school. But you do see that, and I think a lot of people are worried about misgendering someone, and they get flustered and they get really panicked about it because they've done it in public, they've done it in a classroom. But part of my role and what I've taken on myself is actually working with the individuals themselves, and working with our group of, we're called Crew Renfys. We've decided, the pupils decided on the name Crew Renfys, and I work with them and I say, right, you've got to also accept that there might be staff that might say things that are wrong, and they don't do it purposely. It's just a way of figure of speech, it's the way that we talk. And sometimes, I think there's people in this room, would you be able to stand up in front of a room of 30, almost every hour, every day? It's quite difficult, and it is challenging, and you've got to keep that momentum going, and you've got to keep that energy up. And sometimes things are just going to slip. And, I can tell you now, mine, I got 3 students in the audience. I've taught them all.
Wow.
Yeah, 3 of my students, yeah. And
skiving school, are you?
No, exactly. I actually, one of my weaknesses that I always say, and I've said it since they've been in year 7, is referring to a group of individuals as guys. You know, guys. Oh, guys, come on, quieten down now. And I just think to myself, well, that's a male term, isn't it? Guys, male. And I just think to myself, why am I doing that? You know, I shouldn't be doing that. And I should be, looking at the way that I'm doing it myself. But yeah, it's difficult. And I think that staff need more training. And that's the way forward, is those people in those, situations and in those professions, they need more support. And once the support filters down, then they are able to help and to progress. The new curriculum, it gives us the power, and it gives us, the opportunity as a school to design the curriculum ourselves, and have our own sort of pathway through the education of the young people. And definitely, we feel it's more inclusive, but also staff are worried and scared about delivering it because they just don't feel like they're confident enough. And it's about that confidence, really. But also, it's just about making sure that they feel, actually, just go for it. Go for it, because we can always look back and we can always reflect. Things are going to go wrong. People are going to say wrong things at the wrong time. And we've just got to, learn about that. And I actually spent a bit of time last year writing the LGBT plus inclusion policy for the school. So I wrote a 25-page policy, and it's the first policy the school has ever seen of the sort. And it was just safeguarding, things that perhaps the school needs to identify, and the school needs to help the community, all staff, communities, parents, carers, and young people of the school. We're not that privileged to have a brand new school. We don't have a new school of 21st century schools programme. So we have quite an old building, an old school building. You've got your boys and your girls toilets, you've got your disabled toilet, you've got boys, girls changing rooms, things like that. And the conversations are starting to move now on how do we support those individuals. And, I think it's really important, because actually we're seeing a lot more coming through now to us. I'm secondary high school teacher, so I teach from the age of 11 up to 18. And we actually see a lot more young people coming through now from the primary school age who are now identifying as different pronouns to what they were at birth, and it's a way of supporting them and making sure that we've got that sort of, support network in place right at the start, and that we can give that support then as staff as well. But yep, staff need the support as well, and everyone involved really needs that education to move it forward.
Does every school in Wales, and really across the UK, need a Steffan?
Absolutely, sounds like it.
There is no evidence that gender identity is some biological essence. However, gender identity is required by queer theorist academics for political purposes, to dissolve the binary opposition between male and female. Professor Emma Renold quotes Richard Johnson. Queer theory is linked to forms of politics which deliberately seek to break down the fixed boundaries between the hetero-homo, gender and other binaries, to multiply sexual categories and ultimately dissolve them. In her seminal work, Gender Trouble, Judith Butler refers to the work of Robert Stoller, who coined the term gender identity. She writes, if the notion of an abiding substance is a fictive construction produced through the compulsory ordering of attributes into coherent gender sequences, then it seems that gender as substance, the viability of man and woman as nouns, is called into question by the dissonant play of attributes that fail to conform to sequential or causal models of intelligibility. The appearance of an abiding substance or gendered self, what the psychiatrist Robert Stoller refers to as gender core, is thus produced by the regulation of attributes along culturally established lines of coherence. So there you have it. Robert Stoller was an American professor of psychiatry who worked with transsexual and transvestite patients and coined the term gender identity. Stoller believed that all children are born with an initial female gender identity, and that the identity remains until a masculine presence disrupts this female identity development. Stoller outlined three main factors that contribute to the development of gender identity: biological and hormonal influences, sex assignment at birth, and environmental and psychological influences. These factors form the permanent sense of maleness or femaleness that a person has, and is usually established by age 2. Stoller believed that threats to the core gender identity pose as threats to the sense of self. This results in sexual perversions, which serves as a form of revenge against the individual who initially threatened the gender identity. Researcher Malcolm Clark explains how Stoller attempted to back up his hypothesis by studying the Sambia tribe of Papua New Guinea. In 1979, 55-year-old Stoller embarked on a journey of 7,000 miles from his home in California. In Papua New Guinea, he met Gilbert Hurt, who was 35 at the time. Hurt was the anthropologist cited by Peter Tatchell in his notorious letter to The Guardian in 1997, which defended the pro-paedophilia book Dares to Speak. According to Tatchell's letter, Hurt had provided evidence that in some societies, adult-child sex is considered normal, beneficial and enjoyable by old and young alike. The adult-child sex he referred to was part of an initiation ceremony that started with boys from as young as 7 being kidnapped and bundled into the forest. Mothers who complained were beaten. When they got to the forest, the boys were surrounded by adult men who thrashed them. They then had their septum pierced before being taught to fellate using flutes. In 1993, Hurd was interviewed by the Dutch pro-paedophile magazine Paidica. When asked if the boys, as young as 7, fell in love with the older men, Hurd suggested instead they'd like to gossip among each other about the men's physical qualities. Astonishingly, he then compares the boys to wine connoisseurs, who instead of waxing lyrical about wine, do so about the relative qualities of their abusers' semen. Stoller believed the practices of the Sambia tribe proved his theory. In his book Third Sex, Gilbert Hurd claimed the sex binary was old hat and used the child-abusing Sambia as confirmation no child is male or female. They are hermaphroditic, a mixture of both masculine and feminine. Really? Clark writes, Stoller cited the Sambia as evidence humans can't rely on the simple biology of male and female. Every society has expectations of masculinity and femininity and works hard to help children achieve them. It never occurred to him that male and female could be value-free. Arguments about gender identity have evolved since Stoller, but they've never lost this presumption. When anyone claims a child has a gender identity different from their sex, they just mean the boy or girl behaves in a way that doesn't fit social stereotypes. Let them be. Stoller, Hurd, and the abusive warriors of the Sambia instead believed it was legitimate to abuse children to make them fit their stereotypes. How is that any different from medically abusing children today to make them fit our stereotypes of masculinity and femininity? During LGBT+ History Month, it is important that we share this story of the origin of gender identity.
And as we're sharing our stories and our histories during LGBT History Month, let's also remember that the lives we lead today are the history of tomorrow. So it's up to us to hand on to the next generation a legacy of change and of justice, just like those who stood up and stood out in our own history left for us.